As the woman drove down a deserted highway, she noticed a lone pair of headlights quickly approaching her car from behind. When the car came closer, she noticed that it was going to overtake her. The car drew up beside her, but then the driver suddenly swerved back behind her car. She started getting nervous and kept an eye on the strange car in her rear-view mirror. He pulled up dangerously close to her rear bumper and began flashing his high beams at her. The headlights dimmed for a moment, but then the high beams flashed again and the car behind her surged forward. The car followed her very closely, and on tight curves or over hills he would flash his high beams on and off. The frightened woman struggled to keep her eyes on the road and fought the urge to keep looking at the car behind her. Finally, she approached her exit, but the car continued to follow, flashing the high beams again and again. The terrified woman took out her mobile phone and dialed 911. When the operator answered, the woman screamed into the phone, "A car is following me. He keeps tailgating and blinking his lights at me." The woman gave her address, and in a few moments she saw the red and blue lights of a police car in the distance. She breathed a sigh of relief as she pulled into her driveway. But suddenly the strange car pulled into the driveway behind her and began blinking its lights on and off like a maniac. The police car screeched to a halt on the woman's front lawn, and the two police officers jumped out with their guns drawn. They pulled the man out of the strange car and forced him to lie face down on the lawn. They handcuffed him as he screamed, "There's someone in her car! There's someone in her car!" The two policemen suddenly pointed their guns in the woman's direction and fired. The woman screamed, but when she turned around, she saw the bloody corpse of a murderer fall out of her back seat. There was a large butcher knife still clasped in his cold, dead hand. The police searched her back seat and found duct tape, a blindfold, and a pair of handcuffs laying there. The woman realized that the man in the strange car had been trying to save her. When the police released him, he explained that as he pulled up behind her car and his headlights lit up her back seat, he had seen a man with a butcher knife rising up behind her. Just as the madman was about to stab her, he flashed his high beams and the figure crouched back down. "I flashed my high beams every time I saw him raise the knife," he said.
You are home alone, and you hear on the news about the profile of a murderer who is on the loose. You look out the sliding glass doors to your backyard, and you noticed a man standing out in the snow. He fits the profile of the murderer exactly, and he's smiling at you. You gulp, picking up the phone to your right and dialing 911. You look back out the glass as you press the phone to your ear and notice he's much closer to you now. You then drop the phone in shock. There's no footprints in the snow. It's his reflection. The cashier swipes my items across the scanner as I stare at the floor. I find it easiest to get through my anxiety by avoiding eye contact with people. That's why I only go shopping at night, fewer people to avoid. "Did you find everything okay?" she asks casually. I mumble to the floor. Her voice sounds nice, pleasant. Curiosity wins over and I glanced up. The cashier's head is completely caved in on the left side. Blood is streaming out her eye and her ear on the right. Probably a car accident. I snap my gaze back down towards the floor and feel vomit at the back of my throat. After I pay, she gives me back my change in a hand so mangled I'm surprised it can hold anything at all. Thanking her, I grab my bags and turn towards the exit. Immediately, I see a man looking through magazines at the storefront. The skin on his face and hands is the consistency of a hot dog that fell into a campfire. He must be a burn victim. I turn the other way and see a woman with a purple bruise surrounding her neck, her eyes bugged out and bloodshot. Death by hanging. I rush out the door as fast as I can. In my car, I finally catch my breath as I lean my forehead on the steering wheel. Eventually, I look up and see my familiar reflection in the rear view mirror. My head is blown open in the back. gunshot victim. Why did I ever wish for the power to see how people die?
It was the middle of the night and I was in the bedroom trying to relax. I changed the channel on the TV and saw that the local news was on. At the bottom of the screen, there was a breaking news alert. Murderer on the loose, hiding in the vicinity. Police warning everyone to be on the alert. Suspect is armed and dangerous. I was just drifting off to sleep when I was awakened by a strange noise downstairs. It sounded like there was someone in the house. At that moment, my heart began beating fast and I broke into a cold sweat. Straining my ears to listen, I thought I heard another noise. It was the sound of a door creaking. It wasn't my imagination. There was an intruder in the house. I have to get out of here fast, I thought. I slipped off the bed as quietly as possible and crept towards the window. My body was shaking with fear and I was hoping I didn't make any noise. Just then I heard faint footsteps making their way upstairs. It sounded like more than one person. At any second they would burst through the door, and I had to get away. I climbed out to the window and onto the garage roof, moving as fast as I could without making too much noise. At the edge of the roof, I grabbed the drain pipe and lowered myself down until I dropped into the garden. As I paused, I looked up at the window I had just escaped from and saw the lights go on. That was close, I thought. A chill ran down my spine as I thought about what would have happened if they caught me. I made my way to the bottom of the garden and into the woods. Once I was safely hidden by the trees, I broke into a run. I pushed onwards, stumbling through the darkness, moving through the undergrowth, until I came to another housing estate. Clutching my knife, I headed towards another house.
He strained against the lid, but it wouldn't budge. His breathing has become soft and weak. Panic has set in and the man burst into tears. He prays for a savior to come. He screams and wails, fighting to get out. As he passes out, he noticed the box filling with water. Finally, to his car, he drove away from there as fast as he could. When he finally felt safe enough to breathe, a voice from the back seat said, "Leaving so soon?" It was her eyes that first attracted me to her. I didn't believe in love, but the first time I gazed into her beautiful green eyes, I knew she was the one. I love seeing myself reflected in those eyes, looking deep into her soul and knowing I was part of it. It's kind of stupid, but I even wrote poetry about them. I don't remember much, but I told her that there's so much life within your eyes and so much love. Oh God, I loved the way the light danced within them. I couldn't just imagine not being able to stare dreamily into them. Now, if I can just find a box that was half as beautiful as her eyes, I could stop carrying them around in my pocket.
When my wife had passed away, I visited her grave often. Lately, I haven't been able to find the time. Now that I have moved her grave to my living room, I have no excuses not to visit her. One rainy night in October, a man was driving past the cemetery. He saw a young boy walking in the rain. The man stopped and asked the boy if he wanted a ride. The boy approached the car. His face was pale, his clothes were wet, and he was shaking like a leaf. He opened the door and got into the passenger seat without saying a word. The man felt sorry for the boy, so he gave him a red sweater to keep him warm. The boy's teeth were chattering and he was still shivering. When they got to the boy's house, the man stopped the car. The boy got out, and the man told the boy to keep the sweater and said he would come back for it the next day. "What's your name?" asked the man. "Timmy," the boy replied. The next day, the man went to the boy's house to pick up the sweater. When he knocked on the door, a woman answered. The man introduced himself and asked if she was Timmy's mother. "What's this about?" she said. The man explained that he had given Timmy a ride that night before, in the pouring rain, and he had given him a red sweater to keep him warm. The woman stared at him and her eyes welled up with tears. I'm sorry, you must be mistaken, she said. My son Timmy died almost a year ago. The man apologized and left. He was very confused, and his head was spinning. He drove to the cemetery and found Timmy's grave. Lying on top of the grave was his red sweater.
A 15-year-old girl named Donna had lived with her father in a small house in the suburbs. Ever since her mother died, Donna had depended on her father for everything. They had a wonderful relationship and loved each other very much. One morning, Donna's father was leaving on a business trip. As they ate breakfast together, he told her that he would be home very late that night. With that, he kissed her on the forehead, grabbed his briefcase, and walked out the front door. Later that day, when Donna came home from school, she did some homework and watched some TV. By midnight, her father still had not returned, so she decided to go to bed. That night, she had a crazy dream. She found herself standing at the edge of a busy highway. Cars and trucks whizzed by at an alarming rate. She looked across the highway and saw a familiar figure standing on the other side. It was her father. His hands were cupped around his mouth and he seemed to be shouting something to her, but she couldn't make out what he was saying. As the traffic whizzed by, she strained to hear. Her father's eyes were sad. He seemed to be desperately trying to communicate something to her. She could barely make out the words. Don't open door. Suddenly, Donna was awoken from the dream by a strange tapping noise. Tap, tap, tap. Then someone began to ring the doorbell downstairs. Ring, ring, ring. She scrambled out of bed and put on her slippers. Then, dressed only in her nightgown, she ran downstairs and went to the front door. Looking through the peephole, she saw her father's face outside. He was staring right at her, but the doorbell kept ringing incessantly. "Okay, hold on, I'm coming," she shouted. She pulled back the deadbolt and was about to unlatch the door when she stopped. She looked through the peephole at her father again. Something about his expression didn't look quite right. His eyes were wide open, and he looked terrified. She slid the deadbolt back in place. "Dad," she yelled through the door, "did you forget your keys?" Ring, ring, ring. "Dad, answer me." Ring, ring, ring. "Dad, please, I need you to answer me." Ring, ring, ring. "Is there someone else out there with you?" Ring, ring, ring. "Why won't you answer me?" Ring, ring, ring. "I'm not opening the door until you say something." The doorbell kept ringing and ringing, but for some reason her father refused to answer her desperate cries. For the rest of the night, the front door cowered in the corner of the hallway, helplessly listening to the ceaseless ringing of the doorbell. It seemed to go on for hours and hours. Eventually, she fell into an uneasy sleep. At dawn, she woke up and realized that everything was quiet. She crept over to the door and looked through the peephole again. Her father was still there, staring at her. She cautiously opened the door and was confronted with a sight that filled her with unimaginable horror. Her father's severed head was hanging from a nail above the door. There was a note attached to the doorbell. In a crude, scrawled handwriting, it read, "Clever girl." In Korea, when a patient is taken to hospital, a white wristband is placed on their left arm. These wristbands contain the patient's name and information. When a patient dies, a red wristband is placed on their right arm and they're taken into the morgue. In one particular hospital in Korea, a young doctor was working the night shift. It was around 2 a.m. when he finished his last operation. He was on his 5th floor and pressed the button for the elevator. The doctor was tired after a long day and was looking forward to the end of his shift. At 2 a.m., the hospital was very quiet. Most of the patients were asleep and many nurses had already gone home.
He entered the elevator and there was just one other person there. He casually chatted with the woman while the elevator descended. The elevator stopped at the basement and the door opened. They saw an old man dressed in a white gown standing there. The old man was just about to get in when the doctor suddenly slammed the close button and punched the button for the 5th floor. "Why did you do that?" asked the astonished woman. "I've performed a lot of operations," replied the doctor, "and I've seen a lot of people die. When a patient dies, they get a red wristband placed on their arm." The woman was silent. "You saw it, didn't you?" said the doctor. That old man had a wristband, a red one, on his arm." "A red wristband," said the woman as she raised her right arm. "You mean like this one?" Two female college roommates were staying in their dorm room during the university's Christmas vacation. All of the other girls on campus had gone home, so they were completely alone. The roommates were trying to do some studying, but they ended up just spending hours browsing the internet on their laptops. Late that night, one of the girls felt hungry, so she told her roommate she was going downstairs to get some food. She assured her friend that she would be back in a few minutes. Then she took the keys to open the kitchen door and walked off down the hallway. The other girl sat in her room using her laptop and waiting for her roommate to return. After a while, she began to feel sleepy, so she undressed and got into bed. As she was about to fall asleep, she heard a gurgling moan coming from down the hallway. She froze, laying in bed, her heart pounding. The sound stopped, but it was replaced by a dragging noise. The girl was terrified. She couldn't lock the door because her roommate had taken the keys with her. All she could do was lie there shivering as the sound drew nearer and nearer. She listened, shaking with fear, as the dragging sound came closer and closer, stopping right outside her door. Then, something began scratching at the door. Frightened beyond belief, the girl jumped out of bed and hid in the closet. The trembling girl was afraid to move a muscle. The scratching noise seemed to go on and on. Eventually, she managed to fall asleep, curled up in the closet. The next morning, the girl cautiously stepped out of the closet. The scratching sounds had stopped, but she was still too frightened to open the door. Looking out her window, she saw a mailman passing by and shouted for him for help. She heard the mailman's footsteps entering through the college dorm and coming up the stairs into the hallway. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. "Is everything okay?" cried the girl. For a few seconds, there was just silence. "Yes, everything's okay," shouted the mailman. "Just stay in your room and I'll get the police." "What's wrong?" asked the girl. "Nothing," came the mailman's reply. "Just stay where you are. Don't come out." But the girl was already turning the handle and opening the door. As the door swung open, the girl saw the mailman standing there, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. Then she looked down and screamed in horror at what she saw. Her roommate's dead body was sprawled out on the floor, lying in a pool of blood. There was a hatchet buried in her head, and her fingernails were worn down to bloody stumps from scratching on the door for help. One morning, a man found himself walking along a deserted street in a small town. He had no idea what he was doing there, or how he got there in the first place, or where he'd been earlier. He didn't even know what time it was. He saw a woman walking towards him and stopped her. "I'm afraid I forgot my watch," he said with a polite smile. "Can you please tell me the time?" When the woman saw him, she screamed and ran away. The man was shocked. A few minutes later, he noticed that other people were afraid of him too. Whenever they saw him coming, they flattened themselves against a building, recoiled in horror, or ran across the street to stay out of his way. There must be something wrong with me, thought the man. I'd better go home as soon as possible. He stood for a few moments, wondering where he was, looked around, and hailed a taxi. But when the taxi driver laid eyes on him, he floored the gas pedal and sped away. "This is crazy," the man said to himself. He couldn't figure out what was wrong, and had no idea what was going on. All he knew was that he was scared and confused. "Maybe my wife can come pick me up," he thought. He found a telephone and called home, expecting to hear his wife's sweet voice. Instead, there was a strange voice on the other end of the phone. Is Mrs. Sullivan there?" he asked. "I'm sorry, she isn't," the voice said. "Her husband died a few days ago in a horrible car crash, and she's attending his funeral."
There was a young girl who was in need of a job. She was able to find work as a babysitter for a couple who lived in a large, isolated old house. They were going out to see a movie that night and left the teenage babysitter in charge of their 3 young children. The babysitter put the children to bed when it got late and then went downstairs to watch some television. She was just getting comfortable when she heard the phone ringing. When she answered it, all she heard was heavy breathing, followed by a man's voice asking, "Have you checked the children?" Freaked out, she hung up the phone, trying to convince herself it was just someone playing a practical joke on her. She went back to watching television, but about 15 minutes later, the phone rang again. She picked up the receiver and heard hysterical laughter on the other end of the line. Then the same voice asked, "Why haven't you checked on the children?" The babysitter slammed down the phone. The poor girl was frightened out of her wits and immediately called the police. The operator at the police station told the babysitter that if the man called again, she should try to keep him talking. That would give the police time to trace the call. A few minutes later, the phone rang a third time, and when the babysitter answered it, she heard the heavy breathing again. The voice on the line said, "You should really check on the children." The babysitter listened to him laugh hysterically for a long time. She then hung up the phone, and almost immediately it rang again. This time it was the operator from the police station who yelled, "Get out of the house right now! The calls are coming from upstairs. They're coming from the upstairs phone. Get out of the house!" The babysitter dropped the phone in shock, and suddenly she heard heavy footsteps walking down the stairs. Without pausing for a second, she ran out of the house as fast as her legs would carry her. Just as she closed the front door behind her, a man's hand slammed against the glass. She screamed and ran out onto the street just as the police car was pulling up outside. The police searched the house and found the 3 children upstairs. They were hiding in a closet, crying uncontrollably. In the parents' bedroom, they found a bloody axe laying on the floor next to the upstairs phone. The back window was wide open and the curtains were blowing in the breeze. There was no sign of the madman who had made the phone calls. He had escaped into the night when the police arrived and managed to interrupt his horrible plan to kill the 3 children and the poor babysitter. A husband and wife were home one evening when they heard a knock on the door. When they went to answer it, there was a strange gentleman standing on the doorstep. He was dressed in an expensive black suit and he was holding a large briefcase. "I wonder if I might have a few moments of your time," he said. Assuming he was a traveling salesman, they invited him in. The gentleman placed his briefcase down on the kitchen table and took something out. It was a box with a single red button on the top. He handed the box to the husband and the wife.
"Today is your lucky day," he said in a calm tone. "You have an opportunity to become rich beyond your wildest imagination. If you press this button, you will receive $1 million in cash. There's just one catch. Someone you don't know will die." Saying that, the gentleman opened up his briefcase and showed them the stacks of money inside. The gentleman told them that he would return the next day to collect the box. After he left, the husband and wife discussed the box. They argued for hours on hours and hours. Eventually, they decided to press the button. Nothing happened. The next day, the gentleman came back. He took the box, and in exchange, he gave them the $1 million. As he was about to leave, the husband asked, "Did someone really die?" "Of course," the gentleman replied. "It happened last night, in a distant place. Someone you don't know, they died." The husband felt guilty. His conscience was eating at him. "One more question," he said. "Yep, what do you want to know?" said the gentleman. "Well, what are you going to do with the box now?" The gentleman smiled and said, "I'm going to give it to someone who doesn't know you."
The story goes like this. You decided to ride the elevator. You're going up. The murderer will get in with you. He'll wait for you to press a button. Then he'll press the button of the floor right below you. When you get to that floor, the door will open and the murderer will get out. As the doors are about to completely close, he will turn around, and in the small opening between the two doors, you'll see his knife. Then you'll hear him say, "I'm gonna kill you on the next floor." He'll then run up the stairs and wait for you. When the doors open, he will be there, and he'll kill you. The worst part is not the death itself, but the sheer horror you'll experience in between those two floors, when you're trapped in the elevator and you know you're gonna get murdered. Go to any mirror and put your hand against the glass. Don't worry, nothing will grab you. Wait. Sometimes it takes half a day. Sometimes it takes a moment, but you'll yank your hands away when you feel it. Worms or centipedes, who knows? All pressed in tight like there's no more room on that side, wriggling against your skin. When you pull back, the glass is the same, and you'll be unharmed. But now, you know it's there. On the last day of every month, close the blinds or curtains before you sleep. If in the middle of the night you hear a tapping noise at your window, don't open your eyes. If you're one of the unlucky ones, you'll hear that pebble sound at your window. It's not a friend, just keep your eyes shut. The sound will get louder, the tapping will get faster and faster. Don't let your curiosity get the better of you. Don't move. It'll lose its patience. It'll start thumping the window. Your window will shake and shudder, and the noises will only get louder. It will furiously pound the window and shake the panes. Don't worry, the window won't break, but for goodness sake, don't open your eyes. No matter how scared you are, no matter how badly you want to scream, pretend like you don't hear it. Pretend you're still asleep. After a while, the noises will stop. Don't fall for it. Keep your eyes shut. Try to sleep if you can. Don't get up. Don't open your eyes. Don't open them until the sun comes up. Those who do open their eyes, well, no one really knows what happens. I felt that things always worked out in my life, even when I didn't do so hot in school or struggled with losses in my family. Everything ended well. My family told me it was God's plan, so we should be thankful to Him. I didn't believe them. I realized that everything I did was planned. It's like my life was a show. I had to test my theory. I began behaving erratically. I drove different ways to work to see if they had the scenery set up. I walked into random stores to see if they actually existed. My friends and family worried about me. They told me I seemed not to be myself. The producers must have figured out I knew what was going on. I tried my most daring attempt yet. One night, I got in my car and began driving. After hours of driving, I pulled into a motel for the night and went to sleep happily for the first time in a long while, believing that I outsmarted the producers. I woke up in the same bed, but only on a studio set with a man sitting next to me in a director's chair. "Well, look who woke up. You gave us quite a fright leaving like that," he began, polishing a gun in his hands. "You know, we realized that your little epiphany a while back and let it go. You are a clever one, figuring it out. However, you made one error. The show was never about you. It was always about your brother. You, my friend, were an extra. And now your brother will deal with your tragic death this season." That thing has been there for almost a week. The figure in the window. It looks featureless, only skin on a human frame, and it's pressing itself against the glass somehow. I don't know how it got there, and I don't know how to get rid of it. At first I thought it was a prank, a doll or mannequin that some jerks put out there to scare me, but I realized as I walked out of my house to pull it away, it wasn't there. I shrugged it off, thinking that someone had hidden it while I was talking through my door. But when I went back in and looked out that same window, and it was looking in, staring at me. I walked around my house yelling for whoever it was to come out, but no one was there. The thing is hairless and naked, and it didn't look like it actually had eyes, or even a face at all. But its head is turned towards me when I enter the room. When I sit on my computer, I can feel its faceless hatred boring into my neck. But when I turn around, it's innocently turned in a different direction. Finally, on Thursday, I tried to open the window, but it stuck. I think the thing's hands are keeping it down, but I got a good look at its face. Its eyes and mouth are behind the skin, pushing outward. It stared at me, smiling, and that smile just got wider and wider and wider, until I thought its head would break in half. It raised its own hand and bashed the window with its palm. It was mocking me, but I saw the faintest crack begin to appear where it had hit, and I backed away. No way did I want that smile in the same room as me. So I got a roll of duct tape and started covering the window. I couldn't look directly at it. I nearly shit my pants just knowing it was watching me. But I couldn't help it. I took a quick glance at the skin-covered face. A small peek. It was angry. That grin was now a gaping frown full of teeth. The skin had ripped away from its mouth, and I could see down its cavernous throat. A menacing rumble started to fill the house, and that hairline crack began to spread like splintering ice. I pulled down the duct tape. The rumble stopped. The split skin healed over, and it began to smile again. Now it's night, and the noise hasn't started again. There are no sounds, no rumble, no crackling glass. Everything's quiet now. I can feel its claws gripping the back of my chair. I can hear its skin stretching as it smiles. It's watching me type.
I watched as my soon-to-be father-in-law held his daughter's hand as he walked down the aisle. Tears streamed down his face as the wedding march that played in the background reminded him that, in a few minutes, he would be watching me hold his daughter's hand and slipping on her ring. He walked up to the altar and I took hold of her hand, grinning from ear to ear. It was the happiest day of my life. My bride's father got down on his knees and he started begging. "Please, I did what you asked. Just please give me my daughter back." I glared at him. "Shut up and stop ruining the moment. If you sit back down and enjoy the ceremony, maybe, just maybe, I'll tell you where I've hidden the rest of her body. A boy and his friend were in on their way to a dance, driving down a lonely country road. They saw a young girl standing at the side of the road with her thumb out. The boys stopped to ask her if she'd like a ride. She asked them if they'd take her home, but they told her they were going to the dance. They asked the girl if she'd like to come, and she accepted their invitation. So they all got in the car and she sat in the back seat. It was a very cold night and she borrowed one of their overcoats. They danced all night, and when it got late, she asked them to take her home. So they drove to her house and stopped and let her out. Suddenly, one of the boys remembered he had forgotten to ask her for his overcoat. His friend said, "Wait till tomorrow, we'll come back." The next morning, the boys returned to look for the girl. They found her mother, a very old woman, at home. She said that the girl was her daughter, but she'd been dead for over 12 years. She had been killed in a car accident at that same corner. The old woman pointed to a cemetery down the road. The boys didn't believe her, and they went into the cemetery and looked around. Then they saw the overcoat draped over a headstone. Engraved in the tombstone was the girl's name and the date of her death. It was exactly 12 years ago to the day.
If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. If you'd like to, you can follow me at Twitter. The handle is @FuzzyPantaloons, and I'll see you all next time.